They never wanted this story to be told. In the grand archives of the Galactic Council, where countless species record their history, there is a deliberate silence when it comes to humanity. No entries, no records, nothing but the faintest whispers that vanish the moment you try to pursue them. But silence itself is suspicious, is it not? For a council that prides itself on transparency, on cataloging the rise and fall of every civilization, the absence of humanity speaks louder than words. And when the truth finally leaked, it sent shockwaves across the stars. Because humanity was not forgotten, humanity was erased. The Council did not want you to know why. They did not want you to hear the stories of Earth, or of the scattered colonies that bore the human name. To the Council, humans were not merely troublesome. They were dangerous in ways that defied understanding. They were unpredictable, uncontrollable, and most of all, they were resilient to a degree that unsettled every other species. The ban was not a bureaucratic decision. It was fear disguised as order, paranoia dressed up as law. And now, for the first time, you will hear why. It began with first contact. To the wider galaxy, humanity was late to the table. When humans first launched their fragile ships beyond the safety of their solar system, the galaxy was already old, filled with civilizations that had mastered faster-than-light travel and woven intricate webs of treaties and politics. When Earth sent its ambassadors, hopeful and naive, the Galactic Council smiled politely. They believed they had seen this before. Another primitive species, eager to join the great collective, eager to trade freedom for security, eager to become one more cog in a vast and orderly machine. But they underestimated what it meant to be human. The first meetings were cordial enough. Humans listened, learned, and adapted quickly. Too quickly. Where other species needed centuries to integrate into galactic society, humans adjusted in decades. They learned alien languages at speeds considered impossible. They reverse-engineered technology that had taken millennia to perfect. They bargained, traded, and negotiated with a sharpness that unsettled even the most experienced diplomats. And behind their smiles, behind their curiosity, there was something else the Council could not quite define: an unwillingness to bow. At first, the Council dismissed it as arrogance, the kind of youthful pride that time would eventually temper. But then came the first incident. On the fringes of Council space, where order was fragile and piracy common, a human colony was attacked by raiders from a species twice their size and armed with weapons that had devastated countless others. The expectation was simple. The humans would fall, beg for aid, and learn humility. But that was not what happened. When the Council investigated, they did not find a colony in ruins. They found survivors bloodied, burned, but still alive. They found raiders slaughtered, their ships destroyed, their weapons repurposed by the very people they had sought to enslave. The humans had fought with a ferocity that defied reason. They had endured wounds that should have killed them, fought on after losses that should have broken them. And in the end, they had not only survived, but won. The reports were suppressed, filed away under unverified anomalies. But the whispers began. Other species spoke quietly of humans who would not die, humans who refused to surrender, humans who turned hopeless battles into Pyrrhic victories that haunted those who tried to conquer them. For the Council, it was an unsettling pattern, one they hoped would fade, but it did not fade. It grew, because humanity was chaos given form. Unlike other civilizations, humans thrived in uncertainty. They adapted not only to environments, but to circumstances, to enemies, to the very concept of defeat. The more pressure applied, the stronger they seemed to become. In politics, they wielded stubbornness like a weapon. In war, they wielded desperation like a blade. And when peace collapsed into conflict, they revealed a truth the Council wished had never been discovered. Humans were not afraid of death. That was what unsettled them most. To the Council's member species, death was the ultimate fear, the anchor that kept order intact. Laws, treaties, entire civilizations were built on the assumption that self-preservation would always dominate. But humans broke that assumption. They would charge into hopeless battles, not because they were suicidal, but because they valued ideals beyond survival freedom, loyalty, revenge, love. They fought not just for themselves, but for each other, for principles, for futures they might never see. And that terrified the galaxy. The council began to debate. Were humans simply too volatile to be trusted? Or were they something worse than existential threat to the fragile balance of order? Evidence piled up. Colonies that should have perished thrived. Wars that should have been lost ended in stalemates, or victories bought with staggering sacrifice. And always, always, the same phrase echoed in private reports. Humans do not break. Finally, the council convened in secret. Behind closed doors, they declared what would never be spoken publicly. Humanity was to be banned. Not merely restricted, not simply contained, erased from the galactic record. Trade agreements were annulled. Human ambassadors were recalled under false pretenses and never allowed to return. Colonies were isolated, their names struck from star maps, their histories rewritten as if they had never existed. It was not just censorship. It was annihilation of identity. And all of it, every last decision, came from fear. Fear that one day, in the chaos of war or the collapse of peace, humanity would rise higher than anyone expected. Fear that a species unafraid of death, unafraid of sacrifice, would change the galaxy forever. But here is the truth the Council does not want you to hear. They were too late. Because even as they tried to erase us, even as they tried to bury humanity under silence and lies, the stories survived. Whispers turned into legends. Legends into warnings. And across the galaxy, in the dark places the Council cannot control, one phrase still spreads from voice to voice, from world to world. The humans are coming. The Council thought secrecy was a shield, but secrecy only delays the inevitable. The more they tried to bury the truth, the more it burned in the shadows, waiting to ignite. Because humans, by their very nature, could not be erased. And if there was one thing the galaxy would soon discover, it was that the harder you tried to control humanity, the more violently they broke free. The first cracks appeared far from Earth, on an isolated mining world known as Eridan III. Officially, it did not exist. On every star chart maintained by the Council, Eridan III was nothing but an uninhabited rock orbiting a dim sun. But in reality, it was home to tens of thousands of human colonists who had been stranded there when the ban went into effect. Supplies dwindled, trade ships vanished, and the Council assumed the colony would wither into silence. That was their first mistake. Instead of dying quietly, the humans adapted. Cut off from imports, they tore apart their own ships for spare parts, recycled every resource, and learned to coax life from soil so barren no other species would have bothered. They built weapons out of mining equipment, power systems out of scavenge reactors, and defenses from the very tunnels they had carved into the planet. When raiders finally came, expecting an easy slaughter, they were met not by starving peasants, but by hardened survivors who fought like demons in the dark. One raider ship escaped to tell the tale, its crew wide-eyed and trembling. They spoke of humans who moved through tunnels like shadows, who improvised weapons that seemed designed to kill them specifically, who refused to die even when surrounded. The captain's report was dismissed by the Council as exaggeration, another story inflated by fear. But among the less civilized parts of the galaxy, the story spread like wildfire. Eridan III became a name whispered with awe and dread. It was proof that humans did not need civilization to survive. They were civilization. And it was not just Eridan III. Other hidden colonies told the same tale. Places that should have collapsed instead became fortresses of ingenuity. Starving settlers built thriving black markets. Isolated outposts turned into hubs of resistance. Time and again, Humans took conditions that would have destroyed any other species and turned them into advantages. To the Council, this was not just alarming. It was terrifying, because it proved that their plan of erasure had failed. Humanity was not fading. Humanity was multiplying. But the true breaking point came during what would later be called the Siege of Halcyon. Halcyon was a frontier world, technically outside of Council protection, but still watched carefully. The Council had allowed a rival empire, the Kraith Dominion, to expand there, quietly hoping they would sweep up the remnants of humanity and solve the problem once and for all. The Dominion was merciless, armed with fleets that had enslaved entire species. When they descended on Halcyon, they expected a swift victory. The Council even prepared statements of regret for the inevitable massacre. Except the massacre never came. The Kraith forces outnumbered the human defenders 10-1. They bombarded cities, burned forests, and poisoned rivers. But instead of surrendering, the humans fought back with a savagery that defied logic. Civilians took up arms beside soldiers. Farmers became snipers. Mechanics turned cargo haulers into makeshift tanks. Every loss only hardened their resolve. Stories spread of men and women who continued fighting with grievous wounds, of squads who detonated themselves rather than be captured, of entire towns that chose to burn their own rather than let the Kraith take them. The siege lasted months, and in the end, against all odds, the Dominion withdrew. Not because they were defeated outright, but because the cost of continuing was too high. For every Kraith victory, the humans made them bleed. For every advance, there was sabotage waiting in the shadows. For every soldier captured, another 10 rose in their place. The Dominion had crushed empires before, but never had they encountered a species that treated death not as an end, but as a weapon. The Council should have been horrified. They should have been ashamed for allowing such a slaughter. But their reaction was not sympathy. It was fear. If humans could hold off the Dominion, what could they do if united? If a scattered, isolated colony could resist one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy, what would happen if humanity spread further, learned more, and refused to bow to Council authority? So they doubled down. Not only were humans banned from galactic society, they were hunted. Black Ops teams were sent to cleanse colonies before they could grow too strong. Star systems were sterilized under the guise of containment procedures. Human ships that wandered too close to Council space vanished without a trace. And yet, for every attempt to erase them, the humans endured. They always endured. There is a reason for this, a truth the Council refused to admit, but which every human instinctively understood. Survival for humanity is not just biological, it is cultural. It is spiritual. Humans survive because they refuse any alternative. Where other species calculate risk and retreat when defeat is certain, humans gamble, fight, and often win in ways no strategist can predict. That unpredictability became their greatest weapon. The Council feared humans, not only because they fought harder than anyone else, but because they fought differently. While the Council and its member species adhered to codes of honor, treaties of engagement, and rules of warfare, humans treated survival as an art form. They ambushed, they deceived, they played dead, only to rise when the enemy drew close. They turned every weakness into bait, every retreat into a trap. To other species, this was madness. To humans, it was instinct. By now, even the Council could not deny the truth. They had tried to silence the stories, but the galaxy was buzzing with them. Tales of humans who fought on with broken bones, of colonists who starved for weeks, but still managed to kill their invaders, of entire fleets that should have been annihilated, but instead turned hopeless battles into victories through sheer unpredictability. The stories were terrifying, not because they were exaggerated, but because they were true. And so the ban became more than a law, it became dogma. Council representatives spoke in hushed tones, warning of the human danger, painting them as unstable, violent, unfit for galactic society. But beneath their rhetoric was a far simpler truth. The Council was afraid. Afraid of a species that could not be broken. Afraid of a people who turned desperation into strength. Afraid of what might happen if the galaxy one day discovered not only that humans had survived, but that they were thriving. Because the Council understood something they would never admit publicly. Humanity did not need the galaxy. But one day, the galaxy might need humanity. Fear spreads faster than light. Long before most species had ever laid eyes on a human, their names carried weight like a shadow in the dark. The stories whispered in starports, traded in the hidden frequencies of smugglers, muttered in war councils, did more damage to the Council's image than any official decree ever could. For the first time in recorded history, the so-called guardians of galactic order were afraid of their own citizens learning the truth. The tailies were always different, always changing, but one thing remained constant. The humans refused to die when logic demanded they should. On the fringes of the galactic core, a Zathari captain told of a trade convoy ambushed by raiders. The humans aboard, outnumbered 5-1, should have surrendered. Instead, they locked themselves in the cargo bay and vented half the ship into space. The raiders assumed they had killed everyone. But the humans clinging to emergency suits, tethered together with nothing but stripped wires, boarded the raider flagship, sabotaged its reactor, and lived to tell the story. The captain described them with one word: impossible. On a frozen moon in the Silther Expanse, a group of mercenaries swore that they saw humans use fire to drive back predators that no weapon could pierce. Not plasma rifles, not laser cannons, just fire, primitive and brutal and yet effective. They fought like the beasts themselves, one mercenary confessed, eyes haunted, as if they were less afraid of death than the creatures hunting them. Even among the disciplined militaries of the galaxy, the whispers grew. A Drexian warlord warned his troops that fighting humans was like fighting the void. No matter how much you destroyed, the void remained. A Kraith officer one who had survived Halcyon told recruits that humans were not soldiers. They were disasters in flesh, storms that could not be controlled. They are not bound by reason, he warned. They will destroy themselves if it means destroying you. At first, the Council dismissed these stories as superstition, exaggerations born of fear. But then they noticed something troubling. The rumors were changing behavior. Pirates avoided systems rumored to harbor human survivors. Smugglers demanded triple pay to cross human-controlled space. Entire factions adjusted their battle plans, factoring in the human variable, even when no humans were confirmed to be present. The myth of humanity had become a weapon more powerful than any fleet. And the Council realized something terrifying. The ban had backfired. They had hoped to erase humanity from history. Instead, they had made humans legendary. By casting them out, they had turned them into the galaxy's greatest enigma. Every attempt to silence their existence only fueled curiosity. Every attempt to destroy them only created more stories of impossible survival. The humans had become not just a species, but a symbol of living contradiction that the galaxy could not ignore. So why did humans refuse to break? Why did they endure when other species would crumble? The answer was buried deep in the human psyche. Most species in the galaxy had evolved in stable environments. They grew in fertile lands, on planets with few predators, in ecosystems that encouraged cooperation and balance. Their civilizations reflected that: orderly, cautious, predictable. But humans came from chaos. Their whole world was a crucible of storms, earthquakes, plagues, and predators. Survival had never been guaranteed. It was clawed from the jaws of extinction, over and over again. And so, for humans, struggle was not an exception. It was the rule. They were forged in adversity, hardened by it, even comforted by it. Where other species saw catastrophe, humans saw a challenge. Where others saw the end, humans saw a beginning. That was why the council feared them, because humans thrived where others perished. And this truth was not lost on the outcasts themselves. On hidden colonies across the stars, humans began to embrace the legends. They did not hide from the stories of their brutality, their chaos, their madness. They spread them. They made them larger than life. To the galaxy, they became monsters. To themselves, they became myths. Parents told their children bedtime stories, not of safety, but of defiance. Soldiers trained not for victory, but for survival against impossible odds. Entire cultures rose on the foundation of one simple truth. The council wanted them erased, and therefore they must endure. The council, of course, tried to counter this. They released propaganda branding humans as savages, unfit for civilized society. They warned of human violence, human unpredictability, human cruelty. But the irony was cruel. Every insult became another layer of the myth. Every attempt to demonize them only confirmed what the galaxy already believed, that humans were different, dangerous, untamable. And then came the event that shattered the council's silence forever. A deep space research station, located on the edge of the Veiling Nebula, stopped transmitting. The council dispatched a recovery team, expecting a simple malfunction. What they found instead shook them to their core. The station had been overrun by raiders. Dozens of scientists and researchers were dead, but scattered among the wreckage were messages, frantic, desperate transmissions from a single survivor. A human. Her name was Commander Elara Miles, a security officer assigned to protect the station. By all logic, she should have died within the first hours of the attack. Outnumbered, outgunned, cut off from supplies, her situation was hopeless. Yet somehow, she had lasted weeks. The recovery team pieced together fragments of her transmissions, each one more chilling than the last. "They think I am cornered," she whispered in one. "They are wrong. I can hear them searching the vents. I am already behind them. They wanted a prisoner. I gave them a ghost." For nearly a month, she stalked the raiders through the halls of the station, using traps, sabotage, and sheer endurance to whittle them down. By the time the council team arrived, the raiders were gone. Not fled dead, all of them. Slain by one human who had refused to surrender. The council buried the story, classified the reports, silenced the witnesses. But it was too late. The transmissions had leaked. And soon, across the galaxy, beings whispered of the human who had turned an entire raider crew into prey. They called her the Shadow of Valen, the ghost of the nebula, the demon of the dark. The council wanted humanity forgotten. Instead, they had unleashed a legend. And as legends spread, so too did questions. Why had the council banned humans? Why had they been cast out, erased so violently, so absolutely? What truth was the council hiding? Because if even a fraction of these stories were true, then humanity was not a danger to be destroyed. Humanity was a force to be reckoned with. The galaxy was beginning to realize that the ban was not about safety. It was about fear. The council was not protecting others from humans. They were protecting themselves from what humans represented, the embodiment of survival, chaos, and defiance. And if the galaxy ever truly learned that truth, the balance of power would shatter. For centuries, the Galactic Council had maintained its grip on order through control. Control of trade, control of travel, control of knowledge. Their authority was not enforced by fleets alone, but by silence deciding which histories were remembered and which were erased. But with humanity, silence had become impossible. The whispers had grown too loud, spreading from smugglers to soldiers, from mercenaries to monarchs. Even among council species themselves, the cracks were showing. Senators demanded answers. Generals began studying human tactics in secret. And the common citizen, those who lived under the heel of the Council's rules, looked to the humans not as monsters, but as proof that resistance was possible. Humanity had become something far more dangerous, than an outlawed species. They had become hope. This realization terrified the council. Because hope was a contagion, it began with isolated rebellions. A mining caste on Thryos 9, long enslaved by the Kraith Dominion, declared independence after hearing the story of Commander Miles. They painted her name on their banners, though none of them had ever seen a human. On a water world called Arthea, dissidents began chanting human war cries before striking against their overseers. Even the Zathari, among the council's most loyal allies, found their youth secretly trading recordings of human defiance. And then came the unthinkable. Humans themselves began to unite. Scattered across Forbidden's colonies, hidden outposts, and lost fleets, they had once lived fractured lives. But now, through underground channels, coded transmissions, and secret rendezvous, they began to share their stories. They compared tactics. They traded strategies. They forged alliances in the dark. It was not an empire, nor a republic, nor anything the council could categorize. It was something else entirely, a brotherhood of survival. And its creed was simple: if the galaxy would not accept humanity, then humanity would shape its own galaxy. Leaders emerged, not through elections or lineage, but through respect earned in fire and blood. Names like General Cale Thorne, who held an entire asteroid belt against 3 alien armadas with little more than scavenged weapons and suicidal tactics. Or Dr. Yara Chun, who built thriving medical havens on planets the Council had deemed uninhabitable. Or Captain Darius Holt, whose fleet of outlaws and smugglers became a phantom armada, striking Council patrols before vanishing into the void. To the Council, these figures were terrorists. To their people, they were legends. The Council's fear became desperation. They unleashed entire task forces to hunt these leaders. Planets were blockaded, colonies sterilized, fleets pursued across the stars. But it was never enough. Every time a human stronghold was destroyed, another rose elsewhere. Every time a leader fell, their death only inspired 10 more. Humanity had discovered something the Council had never wanted them to: unity through defiance. But what truly terrified the Council was not just that humans fought. It was how they fought. For humans did not wage war in the way the galaxy understood. They fought like predators. They used the terrain. They used psychology. They turned the very rules of war into weapons. An alien admiral once described it perfectly after losing an entire fleet to human raiders. They do not fight battles. They create nightmares. Humans understood fear as a tool. They knew how to exploit hesitation, how to turn enemy pride into weakness, how to make every victory feel like a defeat. They poisoned water supplies, sabotaged engines, spread false signals to lure fleets into traps. And when they fought face to face, they fought with a ferocity no training could replicate. They did not retreat when outnumbered. They did not surrender when cornered. They fought until the last breath, and even then, their deaths carried teeth. In one infamous battle above the shattered moon of Ceros, a human commander ordered his crippled flagship to ram a Council dreadnought. The explosion annihilated both ships, but the humans cheered it as victory. The Council called it insanity. But for humanity, it was proof that no loss was ever final, no defeat ever absolute. The galaxy began to take notice. For every world the Council claimed was protected from humans, someone would ask. Protected from what? For every broadcast painting humans as savages, a story would emerge of them defending the weak, feeding the starving, or standing against impossible odds. The narrative was slipping from the Council's grasp, and they knew it. So they convened in secret, behind closed doors, in chambers shielded from even their own citizens. The Council debated the ultimate solution. Some argued for extermination, mobilize every fleet, scorch every world, and wipe humanity from the stars once and for all. Others hesitated, fearful of the cost. For by now, Even the most stubborn senators had to admit that truth-fighting humans was never clean. Fighting humans was always costly. One delegate, records later revealed, spoke words that silenced the chamber. If we fail, even once, humanity will never stop. They will rise again and again, like fire that feeds on its own ashes. And when they come for us, they will not be merciful. That was the heart of the fear. It was not that humans were strong. It was that humans were relentless. The galaxy had known conquerors before, species that rose in violence and burned out just as quickly. But humans endured. They turned every wound into scar tissue, every scar into armor, every defeat into a lesson. They did not just survive history, they weaponized it. The Council's choice was clear. Keep humanity banned forever. Cast them into the void. Never allow them into the halls of galactic power. Because if humanity ever gained legitimacy, if they were ever allowed to stand as equals among the stars, the balance of the galaxy would end. And yet, the Council could sense the tide turning. The more they tried to suppress the truth, the more the truth spread. They could see it in the eyes of their soldiers, in the unease of their citizens, in the way even their allies spoke the word human with both fear and respect. The ban was a wall, but walls could not hold forever. The truth was simple. The galaxy had already learned the secret the Council feared most. Humans could not be broken. The Council believed the ban was permanent. They thought that by closing their doors, by erasing records, by branding humanity as dangerous, they had sealed our fate. But they misunderstood the very thing that made humans who we are. Exile is not the end of a people. Exile is a crucible. For every child born on a forgotten colony, every family that struggled to grow crops in barren soil, every soldier who fought with nothing but scraps, they carried the memory of the ban like fire in their veins. The Council had meant to extinguish us. Instead, they gave us something stronger than recognition. They gave us defiance. And that defiance became legend. Across the stars, whispers of humanity grew louder. To some, we were monstrous creatures too violent, too reckless, too unpredictable to live among the civilized. To others, we were saviors, proof that even the weakest could stand against the strongest, proof that tyranny was not eternal. Every story twisted, exaggerated, reshaped, but every story carried the same seed of truth. Humans do not break. And that was the truth the Council feared most. Because the ban was never about safety. It was about control. The Council claimed humanity was too dangerous, too unstable, too unpredictable to be trusted. But the reality was far simpler. They were terrified of what would happen if the galaxy discovered the truth. They were terrified that others would look to humanity's example and realize that survival, freedom, and resistance were possible. That was why the ban remained absolute. That was why the Council silenced reports, erased evidence, and sterilized colonies. They were not protecting the galaxy from humans. They were protecting themselves from humanity's influence. And yet, even ignorance was spreading. In hidden enclaves, non-human rebels adopted human tactics. Species long considered docile began fighting with human ferocity. Cultures that had always bowed before power began standing taller, invoking human legends as their rallying cry. To the Council, this was infection. To those who fought beneath their rule, this was inspiration. The galaxy had begun to change and humanity was the spark. But here lies the deepest irony of all. For centuries, humans dreamed of joining the stars, of standing shoulder to shoulder with alien civilizations in peace. When the Council banned us, that dream should have died. Instead, it was twisted, reforged into something far more dangerous. No longer did we seek their approval. No longer did we crave their acceptance. Humanity stopped asking for a place in their halls. We began building our own. In the void, where the Council would not tread, human colonies flourished. Outlaw fleets became navies. Hidden markets became economies. Isolated colonies became networks. And all of them shared the same lesson. Never again would humanity beg for inclusion. We would stand, even if we stood alone. And that, more than anything else, was what shook the council to its core. Because now, they were no longer dealing with scattered survivors. They were dealing with a people who had turned exile into empire, who had turned rejection into resilience, who had made survival itself into a culture. The council had not broken humanity. They had created something far worse. They had created a species that no longer feared being alone. Think about that for a moment. Every other civilization in the galaxy thrived because of unity, trade, alliances. Strip them of that, and they withered. But humanity? Strip us of all eyes, cut off our trade, erase our name from every chart. And we will still claw life from the dirt, still build weapons from rubble, still rise from the ashes with fire in our eyes. And the council knows it. That is why they banned us. That is why they silence our name. That is why they fear the truth reaching their people. Because deep down, they know something their citizens are only beginning to suspect. Something their soldiers whisper in the quiet of their barracks. Something smugglers and rebels already understand. The truth they do not want you to hear is this: humans cannot be controlled, not by laws, not by fear, not even by death. And so, the council clings to its ban, as if hiding us in the shadows will somehow erase what we are. But shadows cannot erase fire. They only make it burn brighter. Because we are not the monsters they claim. We are not the savages they fear. We are something far more dangerous. We are survivors. And as long as even a single human breathes, that survival will echo through the galaxy, louder than their decrees, stronger than their fleets, more enduring than their fear. The council banned us to erase our story. But all they did was write the first chapter of something greater. Because humanity's story is not about inclusion. It is not about acceptance. It is about endurance. It is about defiance. It is about standing in the face of impossible odds and saying, we are still here. And that is the truth the Galactic Council never wanted the galaxy to know. They tried to break us. Instead, they made us unbreakable.